Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into something that's probably on everyone's mind, the current state of the U.S. job market. It's been a bit of a roller coaster lately with good news and warning signs kind of popping up left and right. Trying to make sense of it all can sometimes feel like you're deciphering ancient hieroglyphics. But fear not, we've got you covered.
That's right. We're going to break down the latest data from the January 2025 jobs report. And believe me, there are some surprises in store.
For starters, remember all that talk about a soft landing for the economy? Well, this report suggests it might actually be happening, even though things aren't quite as booming as they initially appeared.
Exactly. Let's start with the top line numbers. 143,000 new jobs added in January, and the unemployment rate dipped to a solid 4%. Now, that 4% unemployment rate is particularly interesting because economists were actually predicting it to be a bit higher, around 4.1%, according to estimates from FactSet, a financial data and analytics company. They also projected 170,000 new jobs. So we're seeing a slightly cooler pace of growth than anticipated.
Okay, so the numbers are good, but maybe not as stellar as some expected. What makes these figures so significant in the grand scheme of things?
Well, they mark 49 straight months of job growth, which is pretty remarkable. To put that into perspective, that's the second longest streak of employment expansion we've ever recorded in the U.S. The longest for those keeping score was 113 months, spanning from October 2010 to February 2020.
Wow, 49 months. That's like a marathon runner who's still going strong, way past what anyone thought possible. It really speaks to the resilience of the job market, even amidst all the economic uncertainty we've been facing.
It definitely does. However, we do need to acknowledge that there was a slight reality check when the annual job numbers were revised. It turns out that 589,000 fewer jobs were actually added in 2024 than initially estimated.
So maybe not quite as much of a victory lap as we first thought. What did that revision mean for the overall job growth picture last year?
It means that instead of the initially reported figures, a little under 2 million jobs were added in 2024. That averages out to about 166,000 jobs per month, which is comparable to the pace of job growth we saw back in 2019.
Okay, so it's a more moderate pace of growth, but still growth nonetheless.
Yeah.
Now, we've been hearing a lot about companies behaving as if we're already in a recession, even though we're not. What's driving that behavior, and what does it mean for the average person?
It all comes down to hiring trends. Companies are being more cautious about adding new positions. Instead of rapidly expanding their workforce, they're taking a more measured approach, kind of like tapping the brakes instead of slamming them on.
So they're paying attention to the economic signals, but not hitting the panic button just yet. That seems like a fairly reasonable response, but what are the implications for people who are either looking for a job or worried about the overall health of the economy?
Well, this cautious approach to hiring creates a less dynamic job market, which can make it a bit tougher for job seekers. It also limits businesses' flexibility to adapt quickly if the economy does take a sudden downturn.
So it's a slow and steady wins the race kind of situation for both employers and job seekers.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that this cautiousness could actually be a sign that the soft landing everyone's hoping for, where we bring inflation under control without crashing the economy, is actually working. Companies are responding to economic signals and adjusting their behavior, but not overreacting.
That's a really interesting point. Now let's dive into some of the specific details from the report. It looks like healthcare and social assistance were the big winners in January.
Absolutely. The healthcare and social assistance sector added a whopping 66,000 jobs in January, which accounts for almost half of the total job gains for the month. Retail also saw a respectable increase, adding 34,300 new jobs, followed by the government sector with 32,000 new jobs.
It's fascinating that healthcare continues to be such a powerhouse in terms of job creation.
Yeah.
What's driving that consistent growth?
It's a combination of factors, but a lot of it has to do with demographic trends. As the population ages, the demand for healthcare services naturally increases. We're also seeing advancements in medical technology and treatments, which creates new jobs and opportunities within the sector.
Makes sense. Amidst all this, wages are still on the rise. The report shows a 0.5% increase in wages from December, bringing the annual growth rate to a healthy 4.1%. That's got to be good news for workers, right?
Wage growth is definitely a key factor in the overall economic picture. It gives people more spending power, which can help fuel economic growth. But it's a bit of a double-edged sword because if wages rise too quickly, it can also contribute to inflation. That's why the Federal Reserve, which sets interest rates, is keeping a close eye on wage growth as they make decisions about how to manage the economy.
So it's a delicate balancing act, trying to encourage wage growth without fueling inflation.
Precisely. It is a question worth pondering, that's for sure. If companies are already tightening their belts, even though we're technically not in a recession, it suggests a certain level of apprehension about the future. It'll be interesting to see how this cautious behavior plays out in the coming months.
Definitely. And speaking of caution, Let's circle back to this concept of a soft landing for a moment.
Yeah.
You've mentioned it a few times, but I think it's worth unpacking for our listeners who might not be familiar with the term. What exactly does a soft landing entail, and why is everyone so focused on it right now?
You're absolutely right. It's a term that gets thrown around a lot, but it's crucial to understand what it actually means. Essentially, a soft landing refers to a scenario where the Federal Reserve, which is responsible for managing the U.S. economy, is able to slow down inflation without triggering a recession.
So it's kind of like landing a plane gently on the runway, as opposed to a bumpy or crash landing.
That's a great analogy. It's all about finding that sweet spot where the economy cools down enough to bring inflation under control, but not so much that it stalls out and sends us into a recession.
And what are the key indicators that economists are looking at to determine whether or not we're on track for this soft landing?
They're keeping a close eye on a variety of factors, including inflation rates, of course, but also job growth, consumer spending, and business investment. The January jobs report we've been discussing is one piece of that puzzle, and it offers some encouraging signs that a soft landing might be achievable.
Let's break that down a bit further. How does the jobs report specifically support the idea of a soft landing?
Well, as we discussed earlier, the report shows that job growth, while still positive, is slowing down. This is actually a good thing in this context because it suggests that the Federal Reserve's efforts to cool the economy by raising interest rates might be starting to have the desired effect.
So the slowdown in hiring is actually a positive sign in this case.
In a way, yes. It indicates that the economy is starting to moderate, which is what the Fed wants to see in order to bring inflation under control. If job growth were to continue at a rapid pace, it could lead to even higher wages and prices potentially pushing inflation even higher.
Okay, that makes sense. But wouldn't a significant slowdown in hiring also hurt the economy? Where's the balance there?
It's a delicate balance for sure. The Fed's goal is to find that Goldilocks zone, not too hot, not too cold, where the economy slows down enough to tame inflation, but not so much that it tips into a recession. And the January jobs report suggests that we might be in that zone right now.
It's almost like the Fed is trying to gently tap the brakes on the economy without bringing it to a screeching halt.
Exactly. They're trying to engineer a gradual slowdown, and the job market is one of the key areas they're watching to gauge whether or not their strategy is working.
And you mentioned earlier that certain policy changes could potentially create headwinds for the job market. Could you elaborate on that a bit? What specific policies are we talking about, and how might they impact things?
Sure. Some of the policies enacted during President Trump's administration, particularly those related to trade, immigration, and federal employment, have introduced a degree of uncertainty into the economic landscape. For example, the trade tensions and tariffs imposed on goods from China and other countries have disrupted global supply chains and made it more expensive for businesses to import certain goods. This has led to increased costs for consumers and businesses alike.
So those trade policies are having a ripple effect throughout the economy.
Absolutely. And then there are the changes to immigration policies, which have made it more difficult for businesses to hire workers from abroad, particularly in industries that rely heavily on immigrant labor, such as agriculture and technology. This has contributed to labor shortages in certain sectors, which can drive up wages and make it harder for businesses to find the workers they need.
It sounds like these policy changes are creating a complex web of challenges for businesses to navigate.
They certainly are. And then there's the impact of changes to federal employment policies. The Trump administration implemented a hiring freeze and other measures that reduce the size of the federal workforce. While this may have saved money in the short term, it has also raised concerns about the government's capacity to deliver essential services and implement policies effectively.
It seems like these policy changes are injecting a level of uncertainty into the job market that makes it difficult for businesses to plan for the future.
Precisely. And that uncertainty can make businesses hesitant to invest and hire, which can ultimately slow down economic growth.
So we've got this complex interplay of factors at play. The Fed trying to orchestrate a soft landing, companies reacting to economic signals and policy changes, creating uncertainty. It's a lot to keep track of.
It certainly is. But it's important to remember that the economy is a dynamic system, and these factors are constantly interacting and influencing each other. It's a fascinating, albeit complex subject to follow.
Absolutely. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about another key aspect of the jobs report, wage growth. We touched on it briefly earlier, but it's worth diving a bit deeper. The report shows that wages are continuing to rise at a healthy clip, which is good news for workers, right? But you also mentioned that this could be a double-edged sword when it comes to inflation.
That's right. Wage growth is a crucial indicator of the health of the economy. When people have more money in their pockets, they tend to spend more, which boosts economic activity. But as we've discussed, if wages rise too quickly, it can lead to businesses raising prices to cover their costs, potentially fueling inflation.
So it's a delicate balance trying to encourage wage growth without setting off an inflationary spiral.
Exactly. And the Federal Reserve is acutely aware of this balancing act. correct. They're keeping a close eye on wage growth to ensure it stays within a sustainable range. If they see signs that wages are rising too quickly, they might be more inclined to raise interest rates to cool down the economy and prevent inflation from spiraling out of control.
So the Fed is walking a tightrope trying to manage inflation without stifling economic growth.
That's a great way to put it. They're navigating a complex economic landscape, and the January jobs report provides valuable insights into how their strategies are playing out.
It's definitely a lot to digest, but understanding these trends is crucial for anyone who wants to make informed decisions about their career, their finances, or even just their day-to-day lives.
I couldn't agree more. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to navigating the ever-changing world of economics.
It's a fascinating phenomenon, isn't it? This cautious behavior suggests that businesses are anticipating potential headwinds in the coming months, perhaps due to concerns about inflation, interest rate hikes, or geopolitical instability. They're essentially hedging their bets by slowing down hiring, reducing investment, and building up cash reserves.
Exactly. And while this cautious approach might help businesses weather any economic turbulence, it can also have unintended consequences. For example, if companies are hesitant to hire, it can create a tighter job market, making it more difficult for job seekers to find employment. It can also dampen consumer spending as people become more cautious about their own finances, potentially slowing down economic growth.
So it's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If companies act as if a recession is imminent, their actions can actually contribute to making it a reality.
There's definitely a risk of that. It's a delicate balance between prudent planning and excessive pessimism.
It's a lot to consider. But as you said earlier, staying informed, adaptable, and calm is crucial for navigating these complexities.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that economic forecasts are not crystal balls. They're based on a variety of assumptions and data points, and they're subject to change. So while it's wise to be aware of potential risks and challenges, it's also important to maintain a sense of perspective and not get too caught up in worst-case scenarios.
That's such an important reminder. It's easy to get swept up in the doom and gloom, but focusing on the positives and maintaining a proactive mindset can make a world of difference.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into the January jobs report. It's been a fascinating and insightful journey. I want to thank our listeners for joining us and our expert for sharing their invaluable knowledge and perspective.
It's been my pleasure.
Remember, staying informed and engaged is crucial for navigating the ever-changing world of economics. We'll be back next time with another deep dive into a topic that's shaping our world. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.